Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Sneha Shri from Quality Management Function of Dr. Reddy's Laboratories Limited. I'll be the host for the entire 3 days session on the 6th Advanced GMP Workshop 2021. We are delighted to have you with us today at this workshop. We have gathered here to gain insights, share experiences, and get inspired. The Advanced GMP Workshop serves as a knowledge-sharing platform for industry, academia, and regulators on matters central to achieving manufacturing and quality excellence. In this fast-paced industry, it's only fitting that we navigate ourselves towards quality and excel with the highest standards in the production of life-saving drugs. This edition will feature 35 global experts taking part in 12 engaging sessions on the regulatory and technical aspects of GMP, with a special focus on advancements in manufacturing and innovations in quality control. The sessions spanning 3 days will also cover recent regulatory and supply chain developments. This forum remains pinnacle of information, clarity, and details for the pharma sector in its pursuit of excellence in quality. At the end of these 3 days, we hope everyone will go back to work satisfied with the new learnings. Since we are connecting virtually, let me take you through some of the features of the Microsite before we commence our sessions. Please note that the video quality will adjust automatically according to your network bandwidth. A minimum of 2 to 4 Mbps is sufficient to ensure smooth viewing experience. For complete viewing experience, we urge all participants to use most updated version of Google Chrome. All participants will be placed on mute with their videos turned off to ensure that the sessions are uninterrupted. And please do not hesitate to ask your questions. All the participants can raise their questions in the answer box below, and these will be taken up at the end of each session by the moderator. Continuous improvement is achieved through continuous learning and feedback. IPA values the feedback of the audience on these sessions, speakers, and the theme of the workshop. For this purpose, we have linked the feedback form on the microsite. We request you all to provide your feedback at the end of every day. So let's begin with our workshop for the day. I invite Mr. Sudarshan Jain to deliver the welcome address. With a strong passion for healthcare and the education sector, he is currently the Secretary General of the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever part of the world you are joining today. Dr. Somani, Drug Controller General of India, Sameer Mehta, President, IPA and Chairman, Torrent Pharmaceuticals, all distinguished speakers and also dear participants. Welcome you to the 6th edition of AGP program 2021. At the very outset, I would like to thank you all for the continuous supply of medicine during these unprecedented times. I'd like to thank the Government of India and all the stakeholders present here, and we can be very satisfied at this moment that we ensured the supplies of medicine during these difficult times. Besides supply of medicine, there is significant amount of time which has been spent by the industry in upgrading their digital systems and also focus on quality programs. In fact, IPA team focused on the technology, has been having regular workshops, regular speakers program during these difficult times to make sure that we take our industry to the next level. This is the 6th edition of AGP program, and we are very privileged today that we have distinguished speakers from around the world. We have got regulators around the world and all of you as participants. We would have loved to be there in the physical form, and whenever the first opportunity comes, next IPA forum will be in the physical form. But what we will try to do during this session is have a lot of question answered in the chatting form, feedback form, so we keep the interaction alive. I'm sure this will be the starting point and keep on building on the dialogue which we are having to take industry to the next level. There's a significant commitment of all the captains of the industry, all the regulators to build and take Indian quality to the next level. And I'm sure this seminar, this workshop will achieve that objective. In the inaugural session, we have our president, Mr. Sameer Mehta. We have Drug Controller General of India, Dr. Somani, and we are very thankful to Dr. Somani, who has been always there for continuous thrust on maintaining, upgrading the quality standards in this country. Whenever we have requested him to join for these seminars, he has been there to participate with us and with deep passion and commitment for raising the quality standards. We are also privileged to have Dr. Sara today, country head of USFDA, who has been also committed and working with us to provide all the necessary support and guidance as far as quality matters are concerned. I would like to thank once again all the participants, distinguished speakers, and our captains of the Indian industry, and of course, Dr. Somani and Mr. Sameer Mehta. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your encouraging words. It gives me immense pleasure to invite Mr. Sameer Mehta to deliver the inaugural address. Mr. Mehta is the chairman of Torrent Pharmaceuticals Limited and the president of the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance. Over to you, sir.
A very good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all. First of all, my appreciation to all those present here, representatives from the government, regulatory bodies from around the world, academicians, and industry professionals. Your continued presence and participation has made IPA Advanced GMP Workshops the success that it is today. As we are all aware, this year was a very challenging year with the outbreak of the second wave of COVID claiming many lives. During these unprecedented times, pharma companies rose to the occasion and ensured continued supply of quality medicines to patients across India and the world. The industry demonstrated tremendous resilience in rapidly rebuilding business processes, and I would like to thank all the stakeholders who worked round the clock to ensure availability of medicines to patients across India and the world. In this post-COVID world, we've seen the emergence of a new paradigm in quality management. The IPA Quality Forum has reinvigorated the focus of Indian pharma companies on achieving quality and manufacturing excellence. I'm glad to see that the industry has taken several meaningful strides towards this direction in terms of capability building, process improvement, talent upgradation, digitization, and most important amongst all, the overall quality mindset. IPA began this initiative 6 years ago, and there is a high degree of involvement and commitment by IPA CEOs on building quality culture, which is fundamental as we deal with the health of patients. In the 6th edition of the Advanced GMP Workshop, we will focus on areas to take the quality agenda forward. The thrust of this workshop will be getting regulators, and global and Indian experts together and focus on some of the key areas related to quality and manufacturing, namely remote audits, nitrosamine and related impurities, continuous manufacturing, logistics management, and digitization. I once again welcome everyone to this workshop and thank the expert speakers for accepting IPA's request for participating in this forum and sharing their enriched experiences in various areas. We are sure the topics covered in these sessions will certainly be helpful to all. I strongly advocate and look forward to fostering a cooperative relationship between the pharma industry and the regulators towards the common goal of providing safe and effective medicines to all. I would like to wish all a successful interaction during the workshop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your words. Thank you for re-emphasizing on how we are working towards safety and quality of medicines. We all are working towards it. Our next speaker, Dr. Sarah McMullen, who is the Country Director of India Office, Office of Global Operations, USFDA, couldn't be present here due to her priorities, but has been kind enough to share her thoughts through a video message. Can we have the video, please?
Good afternoon, and welcome to this virtual 6th Advanced GMP Workshop organized by the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance. The FDA India office is excited to be a part of this workshop and provide opening remarks for it. My name is Dr. Sarah McMullen, and I'm the director of the FDA India office. It is my pleasure to be here with the representatives from multiple regulatory agencies, industry, academic representatives, and research personnel from pharmaceutical companies. This workshop brings together many key partners in the world of pharmaceutical industry and regulators. As the world has become more interconnected, the need for coordinated responses to shared global public health threats has increased drastically. Patients depend on us, consumers depend on us, and a large portion of the economy depends on us. The events of the past almost 2 years highlights the need for a strong, vibrant medical product industry to achieve our shared goal: safe, effective, high quality drugs, vaccines, and medical products. In the next 3 days, you will hear from multiple subject matter experts as they share their experiences, knowledge, and insights on some of the most relevant pharmaceutical topics. Thanks to the power of technology, we are able to meet together from across the globe. In these opening remarks, I'll provide a high-level overview of the FDA, FDA's India office, and briefly highlight some of the agency's response to COVID-19. FDA protects the public health by assuring the safety, effectiveness, and security of medical products. The agency is also responsible for the safety and security of the nation's food supply, cosmetics, dietary supplements, products that give off electronic radiation, and tobacco products. As you can see, FDA is responsible for a vast array of products. FDA-regulated products account for 20 cents of every dollar of annual spending by U.S. consumers, or approximately $2.8 trillion. The agency has approximately 17,000 full-time employees located around the world and has a projected FY22 budget of about $6.5 billion. This is equivalent to approximately $10 per American per year. About 55% of FDA's budget is provided by federal budget appropriations, and the remaining 45% is paid for by industry user fees. The U.S. relies heavily on imported food and medical products to meet our domestic demand. The FDA-regulated products are imported to the United States from over 136,000 foreign facilities from more than 150 countries. In this slide, we have a graphical representation of FDA-regulated U.S. import lines for fiscal year 2019 to 2020 from all countries versus India. An import line refers to a distinct product in a shipment. A single shipment may include multiple import lines. Compared to other countries, India can be seen to have high proportions of foods and drugs exported to the US. Medical devices and human foods have the highest overall volume of import lines. The trend is similar for imports from all countries versus India. Please note that for medical device import line, the import line numbers are high as individual components within a kit or grouping are declared individually. As many may be aware, India has the largest number of FDA-registered drug manufacturing facilities outside the US. India is one of the largest exporters of drug products to the US, with Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Telangana being the leading states for FDA-registered drug manufacturing facilities. This slide shows the total number of FDA-registered pharmaceutical firms in India for each fiscal year. Please note that a fiscal year begins on 1st of October of the previous calendar year and ends on 30th of September of this current calendar year. These numbers include active pharmaceutical registrations from CDER's catalog of manufacturing sites. CDER's catalog of manufacturing sites is the curated list of registered sites vetted by the FDA as legally manufacturing human drugs for the US market. Thus, not all human drug registrants qualify as manufacturers in the catalog. These numbers may also vary at any given time in the year, as firms can register and deregister at any time. This slide shows the total number of abbreviated new drug applications that were submitted by different countries to FDA. India not only leads on the number of FDA-registered drug manufacturing facilities outside the US, it also leads in the number of submission of ANDAs. As you can see from the slide, the most ANDAs were received from India, followed by the US and China. As India is one of the leading nations exporting medical products and foods to the US, the USFDA established an in-country presence in 2008. The India office serves as the lead FDA presence in country. The mission of the office is to help ensure the safety, quality, and effectiveness of medical products and food produced in India for export to the United States. The India office consists of leadership positions including a country director, deputy director, and supervisory consumer safety officer. We have consumer safety officers, or CSOs, who perform inspections for drugs, bioresearch monitoring, and food. We also have commodity-specific international relations specialists and product safety coordinators who work with our Government of India counterparts and FDA headquarters in policy areas. In addition to this, we have administrative staff who handle the administrative needs of the office. Some of the India office's goals include developing a deeper knowledge about India's regulatory environment, better understanding the capacity of India's national and state regulators, learning about the intersections between India's regulators and regulated industry, identifying and analyzing emerging trends and issues that may impact FDA's regulatory decisions about India products entering the US market, assessing the general safety of India's medical product and food exports to the US, increasing Indian regulator and industry knowledge of FDA legal requirements, and finally, conducting inspections of FDA-regulated products intended for the US. Here in India, the majority of the inspectional work is drugs and pharmaceutical quality, bioresearch monitoring or clinical trials, and foods. FDA conducts several types of these commodity-specific inspections to help protect consumers from unsafe products. Examples include a pre-approval inspection after a company submits an application to FDA to market a new product, a routine inspection of a regulated facility, for cause inspections to investigate a specific problem that has come to FDA's attention. The FDA is committed to working in many ways to protect the nation's public health during the COVID-19 pandemic. While FDA's response spanned many commodity areas, I'll focus on efforts undertaken by our Center for Drug Evaluation Research, our FDA India office, and our Office of Regulatory Affairs. CDER, who's responsible for the regulation of drug therapies, engaged in many activities to support much of FDA's work during this unprecedented time. CDER's key priorities during this public health emergency included making safe and effective drugs to treat COVID-19 patients available as soon as possible, monitoring the nation's supply of medicines and taking action to mitigate or prevent drug shortages, working to help ensure the health of all patients. The following is a snapshot of CDER's response to COVID-19 for the first year of the pandemic, so January of 2020 through February of 2021. Some of the highlights include, for COVID-19 therapeutic development, as of February, there were over 420 trials that were reviewed by FDA, 8 treatments that were authorized for emergency use, 1 treatment that was approved for use by FDA, and more than 22 guidance documents for industry related to therapeutic development. Regulatory flexibility. CDER proactively issued temporary policies to address the pandemic and provide regulatory flexibility on certain drugs compounded for hospitalized patients with COVID-19 and compounding and manufacturing of alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Addressing fraud. FDA took action against sellers of fraudulent products for the treatment or prevention of COVID-19 and issued more than 100 warning letters, including warning letters issued to firms in India. Internet pharmacies. FDA issued 14 warning letters to operators of websites that sold unapproved and misbranded COVID-19 products. Hand sanitizers. FDA published a list of more than 200 listings of hand sanitizers consumers should not use, including those containing potentially dangerous contaminants. Shortage mitigation activities. FDA continued outreach to more than 180 manufacturers relating to manufacturing capacity and supply chain for both COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 treatments. Engagement with stakeholders. CDER alone fielded over 18,000 COVID-19 related drug inquiries from the general public, including healthcare providers, consumers, and manufacturers. The COVID-19 pandemic required the FDA to rework our typical operations in order to carry out our public health mission while protecting our workforce and the workforces of those we regulate. In response to the challenges to on-site inspections presented during the global pandemic, and in preparation for such future emergencies, FDA implemented remote regulatory assessments to assess a firm's compliance with certain regulations and conformance with application submissions where appropriate. For pharmaceutical firms, Section 704A(4) of the FD&C Act was leveraged to request and review records. Although these were not considered inspections, certain regulatory decisions were made possible through these reviews. Due to the audience of this forum, I'll limit my discussion to efforts in the pharmaceutical area, but would like to note remote regulatory assessments are possible for other FDA-regulated commodities, such as food. A few more details on 704A(4) assessments. 704A(4) assessments enable the FDA to evaluate a facility's compliance with the FD&C Act through a review of records in correspondence with the responsible agent at a firm. Use of this authority is not limited to the duration of the COVID-19 public health emergency. If concerns are found during an assessment, FDA will inform the facility, and the facility is encouraged to make corrective actions. One of the other tools FDA is implementing is remote interactive evaluations, or RIEs. RIEs are interactive and may include virtual tools such as pre-recorded video or live stream video. A review of records and other information, such as electronic systems, requested under 704A(4) or voluntarily provided by the firm may be part of an RIE. A remote interactive evaluation is not equivalent to an inspection and does not require the issuance of an FDA Form 482 or 483. Currently, the guidance only applies for the duration of the COVID-19 public health emergency and is limited to pharmaceutical products, including sites covered under FDA's Bioresearch Monitoring Program and outsourcing facilities registered under Section 503B of the FD&C Act. My colleague from our Office of Regulatory Affairs will be covering this topic in detail in an upcoming session. FDA's India office has implemented commodity-specific listservs to better serve our stakeholders. We use these listservs for pushing notifications about conferences, webinars, relevant guidances, and other FDA-related issues. To sign up for the listserv, please go to FDA's subscription management website. We also maintain an electronic mailbox to assist stakeholders in navigating FDA's regulations. In closing, I'd like to come back to emphasizing that as the world has become more interconnected, there is a critical need for coordinated responses to shared global public health threats and emergencies, as is evidenced by the current pandemic. Providing patients access to high quality, safe and effective therapies, vaccines, and other medical products requires coordination and collaboration with all stakeholders. We must continue to build on our current efforts. I look forward to the coming sessions and hearing of the efforts in India in this endeavor. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks for the video message, Sarah. Now let's welcome Dr. VG Somani, who is the Drugs Controller General of India and has been working in the CDSCO drugs regulation for the last 20 plus years. Known to be focused in building indigenous capabilities, I invite Dr. VG Somani to deliver the keynote address to the forum. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, IPA. I hope you can hear me. Is it audible?
Yes.
That's great. So first of all, I congratulate IPA to organize the 6th Advanced GMP program workshop, which is coming in the series and building upon the earlier capacities and capabilities, which is being shared by various group leaders from the regulatory, industry, and other stakeholders. The attempts of IPA, USFDA India office, and their subject matter experts from outside, MHRA and WHO experts, has actually helped a lot during this pandemic for addressing and increasing the understanding, promoting the understanding that how to handle the situation when we have to handle it remotely. Simultaneously, how to keep on progressing in the areas of the newer technologies, which we have been, which the IP has been always doing, whether be it digitalization, use of artificial intelligence, continuous manufacturing, lyophilization, new advancement in the vaccines, development of vaccine during the short period under the commonly known term as a emergency use authorization, and the partnership of this common understanding through this workshop has been of a great value for the Indian industry. Pandemic situation and collaborative efforts of the industry and the government to ensure consistent supply of not only life-saving drugs, but all the drugs. Because during the pandemic time, there were various lockdowns, including the manufacturing units, the transportation, the supply chain, the manpower in these various sectors. They were not available, or they were, because of containment in the various part of the country as per the epidemiological status, was hampered. But still, during this time, due to absolute cooperation between government, industry, and various experts, we could maintain the supply chain and also ensure that the essential medicines which are not required for the general day-to-day medical practice and also for treatment and handling of COVID, medicines, diagnostics, medical devices, immunobiologicals, including vaccines, could be invented, discovered, and through the truncated or limited trials, which made it available for the service of humanity, not only in India, but also globally. And the development of vaccine in India, indigenous vaccine, either through indigenous research or through technology transfer, and also approval of the vaccines which are available in globally at a very astronomical speed. And today, we are approximately nearing 1 billion doses vaccination in India. And that is going to be a reality in few days, or rather we can say few hours. So that is a great news. There has been an outstanding collaboration between industries and government stakeholders. Industry took the active steps to collaborate with the regulator and find out the ways how to keep this momentum. Despite the setback, industry proactively adapted to the situation, and it is now proven that collaboration has actually speeded up the delivery of effective solutions even during such unprecedented time. Since the onset of pandemic, we experience all these things. We need to ensure that we don't lose this spirit. The best practices learned, experiences learned during this has made us more prepared to make programs which are suitable for pandemic preparedness and also during the normal times. We need to upgrade the standards of the pharma industry to meet the technological advancement and meeting the needs of the regulatory requirements. And this can be achieved through a proper workshops and then implementing the lessons learned or the various topics learned through this workshop by hands-on training of various stakeholders, including industry and their workforce, and also sometimes of the regulators. To build future ready organization, importance should be given to operational continuity, improved productivity, and swift decision making during digital, remote, or online working. It has its limitations, it has its advantages. We have to understand that and try to see that it is to be utilized in a guarded manner, and also when there is a need, it should be utilized, and what are the residual risks that should be attended simultaneously, and we have to find out the ways for that. Every regulations usually have the way that how to handle the pandemic situation or emergency situations, just like 704 4A has been shown by USFDA. We have the accelerated approval, abbreviation or relaxation provision in our new drugs and clinical trial rules and Drugs and Cosmetic Act, where the regulators can take the steps to ensure that how things can be done differently or remotely, and the deviations happening during this period, whether it is of the good clinical practices or GMP, how they can be properly addressed while not compromising on quality as well as the data integrity and safety and ethical aspects of the consumer or the patients. A long-term future-oriented framework should be put in place for improving business resilience across all levels of quality control and quality assurance. By incorporating focused capacity building, infrastructural advancement, and upskilling and training of manpower. That is most important, which can happen through various ways, soft ways, direct ways, or indirect ways. The work done by IPA to invite the global audience and leverage the knowledge is really commendable. About the best practices document, which I have just learned, that which are going to be released specifically on media field, which is a second volume, and cleaning validation is one of the testimony of the work, collaborative work, and the work being undertaken by the IPA. These advancement and workshop will help bring the standards of the industry and will help Indian pharmaceutical industry become member of various international forums, including ICH and other forums. The workshop will witness presentation from global regulatory bodies, as you know very well, from USFDA, MHRA, WHO, industry speaker, and subject matter experts on the topics. New technologies as well as changes in the regulation require constant upskilling and updation of workshop, updation of knowledge, and this gap is being filled by Advanced GMP Workshop in to a very great extent. And I would like to urge audiences, which include the audiences, some of the people from the regulators also, industry also, they can take the best advantage of this. I look forward to insightful session during this 3-day workshop. And I myself would sometimes like to be a part of some of the important topics which will be discussed. Whenever I find time, I would listen as attending. Thank you, IPA, and thank you all the participants and all the experts. All the best.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words. You have set the tone for the day and the 3 days of the Advanced GMP Workshop. Thank you, sir. The IPA Quality Forum was formed in 2015 with a vision to help Indian pharmaceutical industry achieve quality excellence. It endeavors to be the conduit of change through thought leadership, knowledge development, and sharing of best practices. Each year, the IPA Quality Forum creates subgroups composed of experienced technical experts from the industry to compile the best practices across the pharmaceutical industry on manufacturing and quality-related aspects. These documented best practices are then published and disseminated for the benefit of the entire industry. So for this year, we have the cleaning methodology and validation and media fill. I would just introduce the subgroup participants. For cleaning methodology and validation, Mr. Vipul Doshi, mentor from Zydus Cadila, Sanjay Ghare and Nilesh Hegu from Cipla, Krishna Mohan Mopidevi from Dr. Reddy's, Gargi Sharma from Lupin, Navnath Pawar from Sun Pharma, Tripti Gandhi from Torrent Pharma, S.V. Gopalakrishnan from Zydus Cadila. The subgroup which consisted of the media fill for the best practices on media fill, Devinder Singh and PJ Deepak from Sun Pharma, Sandeep Sharma and Ashwin Upasnae from Cipla, Pradeep Moharana from Dr. Reddy's, Kiran Deshmukh from Lupin, Pradipta Swen from Sun Pharma, Rahul Songire from Zydus Cadila. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like Dr. V.G. Somani to inaugurate the IPA best practices document on cleaning methodology and validation and media fill. Over to you, sir.
I hope you are able to see this document, beautiful document on cleaning methodology and validation, best practices. You see, it is officially now stated to be offered to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now let's begin with our session. Dr. Rachel Harrington, who serves as the Senior Advisor in the USFDA's Office of Medical Products and Tobacco Operations, will share USFDA's views on remote interactive evaluations, expectations, and way forward. Welcome, Dr. Rachel.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak at the 6th Advanced GMP Workshop on this important and exciting topic. My name is Rachel Harrington, and I work in FDA's Office of Regulatory Affairs, and specifically in the Office of Medical Products and Tobacco Operations. Over the past 18 plus months, I've worked extensively on implementing remote regulatory assessments, including remote interactive evaluations. And I'm passionate about the use of this new tool to support regulatory decisions and oversight of facilities, particularly in these unprecedented times. Next slide, please. A quick disclaimer. I understand this webinar is an informal discussion and my remarks are consistent with that. And for any official FDA statements of law and policy, please refer to the statute, regulations, and agency guidance. Next slide, please. Today, I'll be touching on a number of topics, including an overview of FDA's remote interactive evaluation guidance, statutory context of drug inspections, and how that relates to remote assessments, how a remote interactive evaluation compares to an in-person inspection, steps a facility can take to prepare for an RIE, and finally, some tips for aiding in a successful RIE. Next slide, please. I'm sure by now you've all read through FDA's guidance for industry on remote interactive evaluations. The guidance was issued in April of this year and provides information to industry on how FDA will request RIEs, what firms can expect when one is performed, and how FDA will share RIE outcomes with them. The guidance applies to facilities where drugs are manufactured, processed, packed, or held, facilities covered under FDA's Bioresearch Monitoring or BIMO program, and also outsourcing facilities registered under Section 503B of the FD&C Act. And finally, the policy is intended to remain in effect for the duration of the COVID-19 public health emergency. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to discuss the meaning of a remote interactive evaluation. So with so many terms being used to describe different remote activities conducted by FDA, as well as other countries' regulatory agencies, I think it's really important to spend a minute clarifying what is meant when I say remote interactive evaluation or RIE. So an RIE is any interaction with the facility other than an inspection or a record request under Section 704A4 of the FD&C Act. So this could include teleconferences, live streaming video of facility operations, screen sharing of records or other information, disclosing records or other similar activities. And finally, an RIE is always voluntary. And I'll talk a little bit more about the voluntary nature of RIEs and how it differs from an assessment under 704A4 in a few slides. Next slide, please. So here are a few important recommendations that I'd like to highlight from the guidance. First, FDA will contact the facility to request interest in allowing a remote evaluation. FDA applies risk management methods and tools to determine when a facility or when to request a facility's participation. And this decision depends on a number of factors, and sometimes that information is not always available or known to the applicants and facilities. And because of this, we do request that facilities not contact FDA to request an RIE. Second, FDA must host remote interactions using the FDA version of Microsoft Teams, Zoom, or Adobe. And the FDA representative, which is often the investigator, will discuss these options with the facility prior to the RIE to identify which platform would work best. Third, FDA communications with the facility about RIEs typically include a general discussion for the remote evaluation. And this is often discussed during the initial virtual meeting that's set up to cover logistics, responsibilities, and expectations. At the end of the RIE, the FDA representative will hold a virtual closeout meeting, and typically they would issue a written list of observations if any were noted during the evaluation. This also allows times for questions or clarifications if they're needed. And finally, following the RIE, the final report describing the coverage and findings will typically be shared with the facility. Fourth, FDA will not issue a Form 483 inspectional observations at the conclusion of the RIE. I'm going to say this several times throughout this presentation, but RIEs are not virtual inspections and they're not remote inspections. And therefore, you will not see the same forms that you would typically see during an FDA inspection. Next slide, please. A few more highlights that I think are important to note. FDA may use remote evaluation outcomes for several different ways. So the first is to decide approvability of a pending application, to determine future cGMP surveillance inspection, timing, depth, and scope, to resolve a for-cause need to inspect, so for example, to assess a defect report, and finally, to evaluate facilities, outsourcing facilities under 503B for cGMP compliance. And finally, the guidance states that FDA does not specify the equipment to use in the live streaming video or screen sharing, only that it's fit for purpose. And the equipment will typically be checked during that initial virtual meeting to identify any issues that may impact the ability of FDA to perform the remote evaluation. So ideally, they can be corrected. Next slide, please. So next, I want to spend a minute to discuss FDA's statutory context for drug inspections and how it relates to remote regulatory assessments, such as a record review under 704A4 and a remote interactive evaluation. So the FD&C Act says we shall inspect, and this applies to drug manufacturing facilities that includes processing, testing, packaging, and these inspections are conducted on a risk-based schedule after establishment register, and they are conducted in accordance with Section 704 of the FD&C Act. The FD&C Act and the Public Health Service Act do not explicitly require inspections of facilities named in pending applications. However, FDA can and does perform pre-approval and pre-license inspections when it's deemed necessary. Well, this means that FDA can use alternatives to inspection to evaluate operations and facilities when appropriate, and that includes remote regulatory assessments such as 704A4 and RIEs. Now, Section 704A4, which was added to the FD&C Act in 2012 as part of FDASIA, says that FDA can request records and other information in lieu of or in advance of an inspection. And this applies only to drugs and only at places where a drug is manufactured, processed, packed, or held. Now, this authority does not extend specifically to remote interactions, which is why FDA came out with the guidance that we've been discussing to describe how FDA plans to perform remote interactions and what firms can expect. Next slide, please. So a question many of you may have is, how does a remote interactive evaluation compare to an in-person inspection? And as I've said before, RIEs are not the same as an inspection, and you won't hear the terms remote inspection or virtual inspection. And that was intentionally done to distinguish the activities performed on site with activities performed remotely. Additionally, FDA does not intend to replace traditional inspections with remote interactive evaluations. So ideally, inspections could be supplemented by these additional tools, such as record requests under 704A4 and or a remote interactive evaluation. And this would provide FDA the greatest depth and breadth of information to inform regulatory decisions and support oversight while allowing for the most prudent use of resources, and especially now in these times, ensuring the safety of both FDA staff and industry. Next slide. Another question you may have is, what are some steps a facility can take to prepare for an RIE? So the first one I would recommend is to check the signal, the internet connection signal throughout the facility, just to verify that the signal strength is adequate to support live streaming video and audio during the actual remote interactive evaluation. And be sure to check not just the conference rooms, but other places that the investigator might want to look. So for example, the manufacturing areas, the laboratory, a packaging area, those sometimes have more difficulty in terms of the live streaming. Next, you want to check your portable equipment that you plan to use during the RIE for live streaming, such as a phone or a tablet, to ensure there's no disruptions during the evaluation. For electronic documents and other information, you should identify any limitations and ensure that encrypted and password protected files can be accessed by the FDA representative. Next, documents submitted during a remote interactive evaluation, as described in the guidance, should be in English. However, if translation is needed during a live stream interaction, the facility may need to provide a translator, so something to keep in mind as you prepare. And finally, if a facility maintains paper records and they agree to participate in a remote interactive evaluation, then you would probably want to consider taking steps to enable FDA's remote viewing and verification of the facility's documents, procedures, and electronic systems. And finally, if the requested documents are maintained in a paper format and you do scan them, then make sure that they are scanned as a searchable PDF. It will aid in the review during the RIE. Next slide. All right, another question you may have, what are some tips for during an RIE? So the same best practices you would use for an inspection on site can also apply to a remote interactive evaluation. For example, if you get a request that you don't understand, make sure that you clarify with the FDA representative. So on both sides, it's very clear what is being asked for. I would also recommend making sure that the investigator or other FDA representative is aware when a request will require submission of a particularly high volume of records. And I obviously can't guarantee it in all situations, but they may be able to refine their request so it's not quite so large, depending on what it is. And just as you would during an inspection, make sure you have the right subject matter experts available to explain your operations and answer questions when needed. And finally, be honest and transparent. You know, just as you would if the FDA representative was on site, you would want to apply that same, you know, honesty and transparency to the remote interactive evaluation. Next slide. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and I look forward to hearing a few questions.
I invite Mr. Sirish Belapure to take up the question answers. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rachel. It was a very interesting session, giving the details of what is to be expected in the RIE and what preparation should be done by the industry to face such type of audits. I think it was very interesting, and I came to know so many new things in your presentation. Thank you very much for the guiding.
Thank you.
I think there are few questions. I think people have asked a question related to the whether RIE will be valid or will be done for the facilities which are under OAI, or which are the new facilities which are ready waiting for the FDA inspection. Whether RIE will be conducted for such inspections or not, and what is the FDA's view on that?
Yes, that is a question that we have received, and I know it's of great interest to hear. So the guidance does state that we have the ability to perform an RIE as a follow-up post-compliance actions. However, it's going to be dependent on the specific situation and particularly what the corrective actions that need to be verified are. And I will note, this is also something that's stated in the guidance a few times, but if there's any data integrity concerns, then that probably would not be an appropriate facility to perform an RIE. So it really is going to be situation dependent. But as we continue to use this tool, I think we'll gain more experience in seeing, where it is a valuable tool, and be able to, use it as best as we can.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel. Very clarified the doubt. Also, another question is come from the audience is related to the whether FDA has carried out such RIEs in India or elsewhere, and what are your experiences in that? What difficulties are faced, what problems are faced, and what goes well generally?
Yeah, so I'm happy to report that we have conducted several RIEs in India, and they were very successful. I think that is due to good communication between the FDA investigator and the facility to ensure, some of the things that I recommended. So checking the Wi-Fi signal to ensure you have, that the strength is enough to support connectivity throughout the facility. I would say I wouldn't even say it was a problem, but I did hear that there were parts of the facility that the strength wasn't quite strong enough. And that's why I recommended don't just check the conference rooms, because typically those are have a pretty strong Wi-Fi connection, but there's areas of the facility like manufacturing, testing, laboratory. Make sure that you check those as well, because those might cause disruptions if they don't have quite the same Wi-Fi strength.
The last question from the people is related to the whether FDA plans to continue RIE as a normal in addition to the in-person inspection, or once the travel restrictions are out, everything goes on normally, you will discontinue RIE as a inspection system.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know one, that's of a lot of interest. So the guidance was specifically written for the duration of the public health emergency. So if we were to continue use of this tool, it would require the issuance of a new guidance that would be open for public comment. However, obviously that decision is above my pay grade, but I do see it as a really helpful tool. And I think as we gain more experience, there's always going to be situations outside of a pandemic where we may not be able to travel to a site. And so having tools in place to continue our oversight and our ability to make regulatory decisions is a really powerful and useful tool. So again, I won't be the one making this decision, but I do see, and I think a lot of others see the value in using a remote evaluation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rachel. That's all from me. Thank you very much for clarifying most of the doubts, all the doubts, actually, not most of them, all the doubts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel, and thank you, Sirish sir, for such an insightful session. Moving on, our next set of speakers, Yuan Norton, who is the lead senior GMDP inspector at MHRA, and his colleague Ian Jackson is the unit manager Inspectorate Risk, Control and Government IENS at MHRA, would share remote inspections and observations and experience sharing. Welcome, Yuan and Ian.
Hi, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
That's great. So Ian and I are doing a double act today. I'll start with the presentation that's on the right-hand side there. And then Ian will follow up with some points, and then we're happy to answer whatever questions you've got at the end. Okay, so without any further ado, thanks for having us. And there's my title. So I'm going to be talking on desktop inspections. So if we go to the next slide, this is the layout for my presentation. We'll cover how it started, what we decided to do, what went well, what we learned, and what now and where next. So let's go with how it started, and we'll move on to the next slide, please. So here it says OBI process, which was office-based inspection, but for that you can read into remote inspection, whatever terminology you're comfortable with. Unlike Rachel's description of what the FDA do, ours is actually an inspection. And I'll explain the process as we go. But essentially, I was asked to volunteer to come up with the process for remote inspections, and that was partly because of work that I'd done previously. We have this big symposium in the MHRA annually where we have run for a couple of days and we present to industry, and there's normally about 350 people on each day where we repeat each presentation, and I've presented a few times there. And on 2 occasions I've presented videos, and actually more than that, but on 2 occasions that are salient to this, I've presented videos. One in 2016 and one in 2019. The 2016 one related to how to review Excel spreadsheet data and just what to look for so that you could understand trends. And as an inspector, that's what we do during inspections. We look at trends on deviations, change controls, etc. So I did the presentation on that, and then in 2019 I did the presentation on maybe in a bit more depth how to use pivot charts to then get a bit more knowledge out of the information that you've got. And those 2 QR codes will take you to the videos on YouTube. So if, or if you can't get them that way, just look me up on YouTube and you'll get to those videos along with a couple of others that may be useful. But because I had looked at this information and presented on it, it was considered that that might actually be a good starting point for how we approach remote inspections or office-based inspections. And so it was because of that that I was asked if I would do that. So if we go to the next slide, the background really, timings are going to come up in a second, and all these timings are for 2020. So on the 16th of March, I was asked if I could come up with the process that we would use for remote inspections. And so I've done a few remote inspections. I also had done those presentations, which made it salient for me to be asked to do this. I'd had some bad experiences, I guess, with remote inspections, so I wanted to get the best out of it that I could. So I was asked on the 16th of March. Things were moving quite quickly because of COVID, and on the 20th of March, the MHRA put out a notice that said we are no longer doing any on-site inspections. So in that background from the 16th to the 26th, I came up with a process that that would work, that could be implemented quickly, that was used as much information as we could from the existing processes, but tried to learn from some of the potential pitfalls. So I trained the other inspectors virtually, remotely, on the 26th of March. Then I answered some questions, tweaked the process a little bit further, and then on the 1st of April, sorry, we did our first remote inspection. So that was less than 2 weeks after the lockdown came about because of COVID. Next slide. So there are some challenges or potential challenges associated with desktop inspections, and it's actually really hard to build up a relationship with people when you are discussing things remotely. You can also get your visual cues. So when you're speaking to someone, you can see not just their voice, you can see in their face when they're confident about what they're talking about. You can see when they are nervous. You can see when they are overthinking things, and maybe the information that you're telling you isn't the full truth. You miss out on the social cues of people that are off to the side of you. And essentially, we get a lot on an inspection that you cannot quantify just by looking at a document and you can't replicate by being in front of a camera. So that was identified as a risk. There's also a potential risk of inspections lasting much longer than you would expect or anticipate for various reasons. I certainly done a couple where I believe it was probably at least 3 times as long as it should have been inspections. And what can happen is if you are not quick in doing the inspections and focused on what you're doing, you can then spend far too long, and then what happens is you end up running into your next inspection. You can also be distracted by emails coming in. You can be distracted by phone calls, and if you're not very careful, you can get yourself into a situation where you lose track of which inspection you're doing. Then it's easy to really communicate in a way that you think is clear with someone, whether that be via email or quick phone calls or being online with them. But more often than not, the message doesn't go through clearly, and you end up creating some confusion on the site. The site then answers to a question that they perceive you've asked and you haven't. That then confuses you, and before you know it, you're in a situation where you're spending far longer trying to resolve incidences of miscommunication. And it's quite easy when you're on site, but it's a lot harder if you're doing it via mail or even via calls. And then what can happen as well is you're stuck in front of a desk and you just end up reading everything. When you've got an inspection, if you get given a deviation SOP, a change control SOP, etc., you read it fairly quickly because you know you have to keep moving. You have to be on to the next topic. You have to be out on the inspection of the site. You know that you have a defined amount of time, so you read it and search for the points that you're interested in. But when you are on a desktop inspection, if you're not careful, you end up reading the whole document. It takes quite a long time. You don't necessarily understand everything. You then ask questions and then things come back, and you take hours rather than 20 minutes, 30 minutes to go through procedures. And that's before you even get to the particular examples. So there are some risks that are inherent there. If we go to the next slide. So what we decided to do. Yep, next slide, thanks. So we've got a good inspection process that's been running for years now, long before I joined. And what I want to do is take as much of that as possible and cut and paste it and just enter a new process and change as little as possible. So if you click next, every inspection starts with a pre-inspection letter. And so we send that, and in it, we've added in some pre-inspection requests. Over the last few years, we have included a number of pre-inspection requests anyway that we look at before we come, but we've now expanded those out. And those pre-inspection requests are specific to the type of activity that a site does. So this example is for an importation company in the UK, but it could be for an API manufacturer, a drug product manufacturer, a sterols manufacturer, a blood establishment. We have probably getting on for 20 different types of inspection that we do. And so we set out a list. I used the experts in each of the areas to bring out a list so that we were consistent in the information that we asked a site to provide before the inspection. We also laid out the way that we wanted that to be presented, what information we wanted in certain columns, and the format that we wanted it, whether it be Excel or Word. And if you click again, this is the example for importers, and it's probably one of the shorter ones because there's no manufacturing going on, and there's over 40 different requests. And next, thanks. So there's no way that works on email. We've done inspections before remotely where information comes in and out, and sometimes the file size doesn't make it, and it's hard to follow and track through emails. So we decided that we needed a file transfer system. So we're happy to use the site's file transfer system. So if you've got one, that's grand. We're happy to use it, or we've got one as well. Then we would just need to know which one of your people we're going to be uploading. So that allows all the information to be sent on. in advance. Then what we ask the inspector to do is to look at it and read it and try and do as much as possible before the inspection starts. What we typically do for an inspection, obviously, is we travel to an inspection, which is normally a day. If it's overseas, it can be 2 days. And we also travel back. So there's 2 days that is just purely traveling that could be taken up by doing some preparation. And so if the inspector then has done their reading, they know what they're going to look at. So then we go into the opening meeting, and in the opening meeting, we would do that completely as normal. Obviously, we're not there physically. We are on camera, but we would go through exactly the same steps, and we would speak to people and introduce ourselves, do everything there. And okay, just throwing me there with the things that are coming up on screen, but never mind. The opening meeting, which would go as normal, half an hour, something like that. And then the inspector would be able to, because they've done all this prep work, immediately after the opening meeting, ask the site, right, these are the deviations that I want to see. I have some questions on your change control system. And the back room and everyone in the room would then be able to progress immediately, and everyone would have a job to do, and there would be no downtime. Because otherwise, if you have the opening meeting and then you call off, the inspector then just starts reading, you've got everyone at site not knowing what's going on. Obviously, it's a bit tense for them. They'll be sitting there waiting for information, not knowing what the inspector's looking at sometimes, and it can be quite difficult. But if we've provided that information, we can just go straight into the inspection, start asking questions. The backroom can be looking for the deviations, change controls, complaints, etc., whatever we've asked for. And then we touch base at various points through the day. And what we do now on remote inspections that we wouldn't normally do, unlike the FDA, is we wouldn't do daily roundups. But during these remote inspections, there's still potential for confusion, and it can be sometimes difficult for the site to understand exactly what the inspector is doing. So we now run a short daily roundup, not to cover all the deficiencies again and discuss them, because we're perfectly clear as we go through the process. We will make it absolutely clear to all members of the staff that we're communicating with whether there's a deficiency or not. So the daily roundup is a useful thing, and then it also helps us to work out what we're going to do the next day, or if there's any delay to the next part of the inspection. Once the inspection is completed, and this is purely a remote inspection at this point, we do the closeout meeting just completely as standard. The closeout, again, we're online, but we would go through exactly the same process, speaking to people, and then provide a post-inspection letter immediately afterwards. And then once the site has provided the responses and everything is okay, they get a GMP certificate. If you could click twice, that would be handy. Thank you. And that GMP certificate will say on it that the inspection was carried out based on a remote inspection, and that will be on the back page. And that back page isn't classed as a restriction, it's a comment, so that anyone who's looking at it knows the scope of the inspection. So whenever you're looking at a GMP certificate, you should always look at the back page as well to see what restrictions or comments are in there. So that covers the the off-site part of the inspection, the remote part. And then what we decided to do was we would carry out an inspection of the areas that we didn't see, the manufacturing areas, the labs, and then also, depending on the time difference, we might also have a look at some of the, again, we would give our deficiencies in a post-inspection letter. We would get any responses, and we would then close out the inspection, and this time we would give a GMP certificate with no comments on the back. Next page. So what went well? Next page. Yeah, perfect. So the main thing for us, I guess, is that we maintained regulatory oversight. So we were able to carry out inspections, demonstrate that we were doing our job as a regulator and maintaining patient safety. We believe that the sites appreciated being inspected, and they certainly were happy to receive GMP certificates. The process worked because we identified deficiencies and we tracked and trended those, and yeah, they weren't too dissimilar to what we would find on site. And obviously the scope wasn't the same because we weren't looking at manufacturing in the same way and we weren't looking in the QC labs in the same way, but we did find deficiencies, so it worked well. The file transfer system, I don't think anyone had any problems with that. Everything worked smoothly, and we were always able to find the documents that we were looking for. And the daily touch base at the end of the day made a big difference, and people were able to make sure that they understood exactly what was required, who needed to be there for the next day, and if there was any causes for concern. And from our perspective, it facilitated the supply of critical medicines as well, and some medicines, critical medicines to support the COVID pandemic. Okay, next page. So what did we learn? Next slide. We worked closely with some of the other authorities and learned from them, and also fed back our own understandings and what information was useful and what pitfalls we'd find. So that was good. That's us working internationally, and we'll continue to do that. We learned that they do take longer, these remote inspections, even if you're quite smart in the way that you do it and you prepare in advance. But the prep work does make a difference. It can be useful to have a call with the site beforehand to make sure that all the technological issues are sorted out and they understand the process that we're going to go through. And we do just accept that you gain some time back by not traveling, and that is time that is useful for you. So we do try to stick to timelines as much as possible, and given the right circumstances, we can actually do it in not significantly longer than the time that would actually be on site in a normal inspection, particularly if you make frequent contact with the site. And making frequent contact with the site also leads to everyone being calm, because you know what's being discussed, you know what the person's doing, the inspector's doing, and the site are able to put their resources into the right place and not just have people hanging around, not sure what's going on and sitting in the back room doing nothing. We weren't sure if this would happen though or not, but we did actually find some critical deficiencies. And from a remote inspection, obviously that validates that this is discriminative and giving us the information that we needed. And again, we can argue that definitely, if it was a critical, that meant that either the system was not in control at all, or ultimately that there was patient safety issues. So by raising criticals, that demonstrated that this process was acceptable. And the more time you spent online, the quicker the process, and the less communication errors. And what we did find though as well is that this process doesn't really lend itself to short notice or unannounced inspections. You really have to let a site know in a reasonable time to give them enough time to provide the information that you want. If you want to do an unannounced inspection, we identified that would actually have to be done on site and turn up. Okay, next slide. What now and where next? Okay, next slide. So, I don't know exactly how many inspections we've done that are remote, because we've also moved from remote to hybrid inspections, and we've also done some on-site inspections. And in the UK, we've had 3 different lockdowns, but different parts of the country have had lockdowns at different times. So we've also got inspectors that aren't well enough to travel into certain areas, and we want to protect them and make sure that they're safe. So Our best guess at the moment is that we've done somewhere between 800 and 1,000 remote or hybrid inspections since the 1st of April last year. That's not an insignificant amount. The breakdown would roughly be, we're probably over 400 for GDP, maybe 450, possibly more. GMP is around about the probably mid 300s, 400 mark, and the other XPs make up the rest. So a significant number of remote inspections. What I recommend to inspectors now is that you spend the whole time online, essentially. Just like this, speaking to the camera, you're seeing the people that you're speaking to. When we initially started the process, it was going to be online part of the time and touching base. But I found that if you go online the whole time, you can build up a rapport with the site. You can understand where the risk areas are much better. You can keep things moving along, so you're almost compelled to look at things in the same timeline that you would on an on-site inspection. The site can see exactly what you're doing, so they have no qualms about understanding or being able to prepare for what happens next. It minimizes the risk of data integrity issues, because if you ask for something, you'll see it in the timeline that you're looking for, and that means that it's less likely to be able to create it in the background and then delayed. And it also means that you can shorten, you probably don't need those daily roundups, or they don't need to be quite so long because you're having all that time during the day with the people. You might believe that that's incredibly tiring for people online, but every inspection is tiring. It's tiring for the inspector, it's tiring for the site. So if you're online the whole time, you do get the benefit because you can understand what the inspector is looking for, but you will also guarantee that the inspection will finish earlier because the timelines are bound and it will minimize the risk of any overlap. When it comes to pictures of the facility and videos, we've used those quite a bit. They're very useful. We know their limitations, but they're certainly something that we would like to continue using. And then we've been using Teams more frequently, that's our system, but you can have that request control button, and that's a really useful thing. So the site should enable that for the inspector. We have had a lot of occasions where we've gone to a site and that request control button is not enabled, and it takes IT a number of days for some reason to get that sorted. So if you can get that clicked in advance, that's good. That means that the site can share a document. The inspector can look through it without having to say up a page, down a page. We can go through the document much more quickly, go back to bits that we want, and you can see exactly what we're looking at because we do that on screen, and that's not too dissimilar from you sitting next to us in a room. So that's something that is incredibly useful. Then from inspections around the world, what we've also done is we have carried out some inspections actually physically on site due to the COVID pandemic, supply of medicine, so people have been to certain places, but on the whole, our inspections, remote inspections, have been UK based with some overseas. The overseas ones, what we've trained people to do is skew their day so that their hours match much more closely the sites. That makes your day a lot easier. You don't have to then get lots of people working out of hours. It means that the inspection just doesn't cover half a day each day. And that means it's only one person, one or two people, the inspector or inspectors, that can then move their day a little bit. And that's a lot easier than the site moving theirs. That means, again, from a data integrity perspective, there's much less risk because information is being provided as it's requested. And for all the inspections that we've done overseas, and admittedly it's a limited number, but for all of them, all of the inspectors found them successful, and they found them very useful and enabled the issuance of a GMP certificate. Next slide. Okay, so where now and what next? Part 2. So we've got a team looking at some quite smart technology, the best technology to do virtual tours, and we're making progress on that. But we're not at that stage yet, and obviously not all sites have that capability. So for the on-site inspections, obviously remote part of the inspection covering the site, it's obviously beneficial to be able to look around, see what's going on. So the site needs good connectivity. It needs to have worked out the best way to do that, to facilitate it for the inspector, how to get sound so the site can actually hear what the inspector's questions are. The people doing the walking around can answer those questions. It's quite common to have a camera, even just a mobile phone or a tablet on a gimbal, so that then stabilizes the walk around, so that the site transmission isn't jumpy, which then makes the inspector feel sick. We sometimes have had examples where the person in the main room is answering the questions, but someone is just wandering around with the camera and being directed to point up or down. Sometimes the person has a microphone or a two-way microphone, so they can hear what's going on, and they can also ask the operators or the analysts how to explain what's going on. And that all is very useful, but it absolutely relies on internet connection, good internet connection. And what a lot of people don't realise as well is that the inspectors don't always have good internet connections. So I have had to hire a hotel room today so that I can then do this, because my internet in my house isn't good enough for the upload speed. So hopefully this is working okay for you. So there can be difficulties at both sides, which then leads to problems. But the more work you've done, the better. So we are still doing hybrid inspections at the moment. We're being steered towards, if you've got, say, a 3-day inspection, you do 2 days of it remotely and then 1 day on site. But sometimes it's just easier to go to the site because you've still got the travelling on either side there. So it depends on the incidences of COVID in that particular area. But we're perfectly happy to do inspections that way. There are definite advantages with hybrid inspections and remote inspections. So we can bring along some other trainee inspectors or other inspectors who aren't trained in that particular area, and that might not be cost effective to do routinely for an inspection. They might not have time to accommodate for the travel. We can call on expert inspectors a lot more easily, bring them into that part. If there's a significant issue found, it's a lot smoother to stop for a period of time to make sure that everyone understands. Whereas when you're on site, the time pressures can be quite significant to keep going and find what you're looking for. So we can make sure that the site provides all the information that we need to determine the risks and then move on. But what about future inspections? Well, some we will definitely do remotely. So if we've got someone in the UK that imports medicines from overseas and they're a virtual importer, they don't have an office, sorry, they just have an office, we will do that remotely, because there's no point sending someone traveling to a room where there's nothing else to see. We can just look at the documents online. We will use the camera systems. I think I've mentioned before. It's also quite nice if you've got documents that have been filled in by hand. If you just have a camera that sits above the desk, you put your documents on the ground, on the table, and then after a second or two, these document reading cameras allow you to read documents. You can just ask for the page to be turned. You can read 2 pages at a time, and you can go through a batch record in about the same time that you might do it on site. So we'll continue to do that for hand-filled documents. We will consider where necessary or where appropriate to do remote inspections. Our consideration is that the on-site inspections are still the gold standard, still give you the most information and are the best way to operate. We've worked with a number of regulators as well. So PICs are looking at coming up with a guideline on remote inspections. We've reviewed the PDA document on their remote inspections and have an acknowledgement in there from the MHRA for our support on that, and we will work with ICMRA and other agencies to try and make sure that the way we approach these inspections are appropriate and based on risk. And I think if you would like to click on the next page, I'd just like to say from that, yep, one more click, is that okay? Thank you for listening. So I really appreciate that, your time. I'll pass over to Ian now at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ewan. And if you can just confirm that everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Thanks. Yeah, so thanks. I hope Ewan's provided some very real and practical information there that will help move us forward with our remote inspections. And just linking in with something that Ewan said, so I think I'm on a number of international calls with other regulators, USFDA being one of those that are present. And I think there is a common understanding of the term hybrid inspection, and I think, as Ewan's alluded to, that's something that will be taken forward and properly defined in various guidance and documents. So the hybrid approach, where we do a lot of work remotely but do the essential work on site, you know, that bit that doesn't facilitate the remote working, I think that is the way forward, and I think that's a common understanding across international regulators. But the hybrid inspection approach, if you use that term, I think everybody kind of understands that. So I've just got a couple of things I just wanted to link in with what Ewan's already talked about. I'm not going to go into any detail about remote inspections, but just to provide some linked and relevant information, provide information about some of the wider context, and also just hopefully some useful links for you to take forward and review at your leisure. The first point I just want to draw your attention to, so I know that Ewan's referred to the issuing of GMP certificates. At the outcome of a successful remote inspection, we'd issue the GMP certificates, and just to draw your attention to the MHRA database, where we have updated our comment there to extend the validity period, obviously related to travel restrictions and COVID, etc. So we have extended the validity period of our inspections and our certificates to the end of 2022. And that aligns with the extension that has also been posted on the European inspection database hosted by the EMA, so that's UDRA GMDP. So I guess it also shows that we're still very much aligned and working with and collaborating with our European regulators. The next point I just wanted to refer you to was the MHRA Inspectorate blog. So we still continue to use that blog. And it's got some recent updates on it with regards, you know, protecting the supply chain and data integrity, and we do continue to use that platform to get messages across in a timely fashion. So do consider logging into that and making sure you're on the email list for that. And I'm happy to provide links to the facilitators later that they can share with the audience on a wider level. Further to that, in the wider context of things, the MHRA and information related to the MHRA is can be found on the gov.uk web pages, and so hopefully you'll find some information there, useful information there. We do put news and updates on that, any guidance in particular related to COVID and COVID related flexibilities during the restricted travel, and that obviously applied to the inspectorate and clearly to industry and the issues there in order to maintain supply. One thing I would draw your attention to there is our delivery plan. So we have a new delivery plan, and there are specific references in there to some of the items that Ewan's referred to in his presentation. So it does talk about remote inspections in the agency delivery plan. It does talk about the use of visual technology. And just to provide update in that respect, we have been working with the ICMRA group and PICS to take matters forward at a collaborative level internationally. And so do look out for a reflection paper which is being issued by ICMA, and that is on remote inspections. And I guess it not only refers to GMP, it also refers to GCP, so good clinical practice matters. So it's not just GMP inspections. I think you also referred to GDP inspections. We have been using remote inspections across the board for all inspections that we perform at the MHRA. The delivery plan also talks about our collaborative partnerships. We've mentioned a couple there, so PICS and ICRA. So they get taken forward. There are some specific examples there which bring in some wider regulators from, for example, the USFDA is mentioned on a number of occasions, and other international partners, Health Canada, the Australian authorities. So do take a look at some examples of collaborative working there. And we will continue to push forward from a GMP perspective and be involved from a GMP perspective. Ewan made specific reference to PICS. So and what he neglected to mention was that he's part of the working group on remote inspections. So not only is he the local expert within the MHRA, he'll be taking that forward with the PICS network and working that through collaboratively. For my sins, I'm on the inspection reliance group. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that, because clearly in the world we're living in today, with all the travel restrictions, it's really important that we work together with other regulators. But if you looked at the GMP inspection reliance guidance, that's PI 048, there is a lot of onus on you as the manufacturers, as the inspected party, to share information about other inspections that you've been subjected to. So do make it known to us as an inspectorate, to the FDA teams when they approach you about doing inspections. Share information, share inspection reports, share those reports and those inspections with your sponsors, with your marketing authorization holders, with the UK parties that we kind of interact with as well, so that there's clear understanding and knowledge about the inspections, and we can then start to use those reliance initiatives more. And we're going to need to going forward, and certainly in the interim period. So I'll, as I said, I'll provide reference to that. And just by way of a reminder, the ICMA group, so ICMRA, that's the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Agencies. So we're a party to that. The USFDA are a party to that. The Indian authorities are a party to that. So they're also members of that group. And so lots of the work we're doing at an international level is being taken forward through the ICMA group. And hopefully that will provide alignment and consistent guidance moving forward. And we're looking forward to be party to that, to take forward the MHRA approach. And hopefully, from what you've heard from you and ourselves, that we want to play a leading role in that going forward, and we're happy to take feedback. And as you stated in his presentation, a lot of what we've learned is based on feedback both from the inspected party and from the inspectors. So we need to take that forward to make sure that we can deliver that, and fulfil our roles and responsibilities as we move forward. So that's about all I had to say, really. But thanks, Ewan, and thanks for the invite to be party to this conference.
Thank you, Ewan and Ian. I invite Mr. Sirish Belapure for the question and answer session.
Thank you, Ewan and Ian. Very interesting and very nice presentation. Probably with a lot of animation, it was very interesting presentation. So thanks, Ewan. And Ian, thank you very much for giving the ideas about what collaborative efforts are being done between the other regulatory industries and the MHRA. I think it was very nicely talked about the challenges which are faced during the inspection, actions which are required to be done, what went well, what are the learning, and what next. I think every facet of the inspections, remote inspections, were covered by the Ian in his presentation. Thank you very much. I think there are few questions, not many, but there are few questions which let me ask you from the One question has come from the audience related to the first inspection, first remote inspection, and the last remote inspection. What difference did you find? What improvements were found in the overall things?
Okay. Yeah. So the first one we did was the 1st of April. It wasn't me, so I don't know it that well, but I can tell you. Actually, I'll tell you three. I'll tell you the one I did myself, probably a year before COVID, one or so years before COVID. I'll tell you probably the first one that I did, and then how I got on with one of my most recent ones. So that's probably a decent example. So the first ever remote inspection that I did, or maybe I've done 2 or 3, but anyway, the certainly before COVID, I had an idea of some things I wanted the site to tell me. I got them to email me the information, and I started looking at it. I read everything. They didn't know what I was reading. They were sitting around waiting. I mailed them occasionally. They took a while to respond to my mails, probably because the people were in the background were doing other things, just like I ended up doing. I ended up answering questions to emails that were sent to me. I would get phone calls. I would get people seeing that I was still in the office. They would see my status, even though it would show that I was busy, people would still contact me. So what happened was the inspection should have lasted probably 2 days, and I think it lasted 3 weeks. Not 100% of that time over those 3 weeks, but the overall duration was 3 weeks. So it was also difficult to find the information through emails, because as you're going along, you're getting lots of different emails from different people contacting you. So that was before. The first one, the sites were happy to get the inspection. We had a phone call with them. The information was provided. The file transfer system worked fine. No worries at all. But I provided the information, did my opening, and then the site would take a while to respond. So you would then go offline. And in that time when you're offline, I would try to read other documents, but other people would contact me. Then you could see that the site weren't always fully understanding the questions that were being asked, but they were waiting until the next time that you had a call with them to clarify the points. They weren't sending emails or phoning or doing anything. So probably for a 2 or 3 day inspection, it was probably 5 to 6 days. The findings, I think, were still valid. I actually learned quite a bit about the site, because I did end up reading a bit more of their SOPs, because I had a bit more time, because I was waiting for them to respond. So in some respects, I also used it as an education for myself. But you don't want to read everyone's SOPs all the time, fully on every inspection. So the inspection was a success, but it was not the quickest, and I definitely found deficiencies, and the site definitely appreciated having an inspection. But I don't think that they had any massive interaction with me, and I don't think that they found opportunities to ask quick questions to learn or build on their experience. Because an inspection is a little bit of a two-way process as well. It's not just the inspector being on site and reviewing things and finding deficiencies. There are points where you have discussions, there are informal times, lunchtime, that type of thing, where you just get a chance to discuss wider things. None of that was really available. But in my most recent inspections, including one that I did in a site in India, online the whole time, able to build up a rapport with people. You really got a feel for what the site was like. You could have some discussions that were maybe akin to what you would have on site whilst you were waiting for documents to arrive. technology was good. The tours of the facility worked fine. You know, you could hear, you could see. They had people able to take the camera, look behind equipment. They'd worked out the best way to be able for me to communicate well with the people on the tour. The timeline for the inspections was identical to that timeline that I would have been on site by myself and absolutely regardless of whether it was a remote inspection or not. I had a much more of a confidence because I was able to interact with people in a much closer way. The site were happier because they had had time to interact with me and ask me questions. And you know, you can we're not there to be consultants, but we can provide, you know, some feedback on where we see issues or how we might like to see it better in certain areas. So the site felt that it had been beneficial to them, hadn't encumbered them overly, and I'm sure that the experience that they had from us also helped them with any audits that they'd have from other inspectors or other customers. So across the board, it was a definite improvement over time. And if you look back at what I did a while ago to what I did now, it's night and day. That they're hardly comparable.
Thank you, Jon. Very nicely explained. And I think both of the teams, industry as well as the regulators, have learned how to work in this remote working. So probably that has helped to understand the process better and work out better. So time is reduced considerably, understanding is better. I just wanted to ask you, people are asking is one more question is related to what industry should do to make it easier for the regulator. Are there any tips from your side which industry should follow so that will improve the inspection process further and better?
Do you want me to go for that, Ian? Yeah, so those pre-inspection requests, the sooner you get them to the site, from the site to the inspector, the better. Read them properly because they will tell you which columns to put in for deviations, change controls, etc. If you now look at the videos that were recommended or highlighted on that second slide with the QR codes, you'll see what we look at. So and all inspectors do the same thing. So if you can look at those videos, understand what we're looking at, that helps you to present the information in a way that is useful for us. Please, if you're using spreadsheets, don't put in merged cells because then you can't filter and you can't then look for information down a list if you've merged some cells together. So please don't do that. The inspectors then have to spend some time sorting that out ourselves. If you are unsure what the question is or what is being expected, please ask. And I think Rachel mentioned that earlier. We find people so keen to respond that they'll give us what they think is the question, response to the question. But please have a little bit of time to consider what the question is and make sure you understand it fully and then give the information. That works best for everyone. If you can do that walk around and do a mock, you know, if you've got a couple of sites, you could maybe get someone from another site to do to dial in and make sure that your internet is good enough in the various places that we might go to on an inspection. So you have to consider all the places we might go and make sure that you can get there. We like to look into your systems. So if you have electronic systems, whether it be LIMS or other things, we like to be able to see into those. So if you can facilitate systems that allow that, and don't make, we're not asking for control of the mouse in these systems. We would be asking someone to click on our behalf and we would be asking for it. And they would negotiate it. So we're not going to press anything that would cause any problems. Make sure that you have the information, holistic information. So if you have multiple systems, please make sure that you explain that to the inspector. So if you've got 2 or 3 different deviation systems that you use in certain circumstances, it's a little bit harder when you're not on site to work out the type of systems that you've got. And so if you only provide spreadsheets covering certain points of those, and we find out later on that you have other deviations, yeah, but we use deviations for this type of thing, we put them in there, or non-conformances, and we didn't give you that list. That makes it difficult for us, and it will almost certainly extend the timelines. And then one big thing for us, and this is just a general point, is the responses to your inspection we would treat as a regulatory commitment. So if you say you're going to fix a certain thing by a certain date, then if you are not going to be able to do it, which is perfectly understandable, you need to let us know. Please don't wait until we arrive on site to find that you haven't done the thing that you said you were going to do before, because that evaporates some of the trust that we need to have. So any inspection, make sure that you communicate open and clearly with us. And if you communicate open and clearly with us, we can then have a relationship during the inspection. That means that we can be open and communicate clearly with you and understand the potential risks. And if you do that, that would be great. Ian, you got anything to add to that?
One thing I was just going to add is in the pre-inspection phase, just make sure, as you well know, when we travelled far and wide, if we, for example, if we came to a manufacturing site in India, whilst we were on site, we would also look at other areas that were about to be utilised. So let's say currently it was a tablet manufacturing facility, but you wanted to, in the future, you wanted to add capsule manufacturing. We would make sure that if time permitted, we'd cover that as part of the inspection. So use the same principles for remote inspections, that you identify and work with the inspector to be clear on what the scope of the inspection is, and put the onus back on the inspector to make this decision. If we can't accommodate any additional needs, we'll let you know, but be clear in that communication up front. So that requires a lot of engagement with marketing authorization holders about future plans and that. So that's as important for remote inspections as it is for on-site inspections. So I think, and also, as I can't reiterate enough, if there have been other regulatory authorities who've done on-site inspections or done remote inspections, share that information with us so that we can use that as part of it, and it will inform our inspection and allow us to prioritize what we need to look at.
I think there is one more question related to does the dosage differences, like the solid oral versus injectables versus MDIs, does it pose any different problems in the remote inspections, or it's the same for all kind of dosage forms?
Yeah, it does make a difference. It's to do with risk, and it would depend on what the application is for, or what the requirement is for, what the history of the site is. If the site has, I think Rachel mentioned this as well in her site inspection, if the site's had data integrity issues before, then it's quite hard to cover that easily with a remote inspection and make sure that everything is okay. But yes, it definitely does make a difference, because you need to see the operations very clearly for a sterols inspection and biologics and work out exactly what's going on. It's not impossible, but it does definitely make a difference and impacts our risk assessment of our approach to the inspection.
Thank you. I think last question. We have talked about the disadvantages of the remote inspections. There are some definite advantages related to the remote inspection. Really, you are avoiding the cost of the travel, time of the traveling, all those things are saved into this. So considering this, do you expect that some part it will continue to have remote inspection instead of the physical inspections? Do you expect this to happen in the near future?
Do you want to take that, Ian, or?
I think Ewan referenced in his presentation that there are some operators in the UK for the operations they perform. They either need a manufacturing authorization or a wholesale dealer authorization, but actually their presence in the UK is merely an office, and they don't handle product, so there's no storage of product, there's no manufacturing. That Ewan used the term virtual operator, virtual manufacturer. So those operations, they suit themselves perfectly well to remote inspections, and like you've alluded to, that there's obviously savings there on both ends. So from the inspectorate perspective, there's savings in terms of travel time, expense of accommodation, etc. And from the recipients, from the inspected party, it also allows probably better use of time as well. So, but those areas we plan to continue to do those virtually, remotely, I should say, and there's no reason why. I guess then we'd just be looking at kind of for cause on-site inspections if there was something that we needed to follow up on site. But I think the general approach in that respect would be to continue doing remote inspections. And we've also mentioned, and I mentioned just briefly there, that the approach with regards hybrid inspections, I think that will continue, where we can do more preparation and more assessment work as part of the inspection, where we can do that remotely and then utilize our time when on site. But clearly, if we're going to be on site and it takes time to get there, we're probably not going to spend an hour there. We're going to probably spend the whole day on site. I think that's safe to say. But we'll do as much as we can by distant assessment, by remote working as well. Please add to that if you want, Ewan.
I'm not sure I can. You did a great job there. Yeah, there are some.
For patiently answering all our questions, and I think thank you very much for the nice session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, Jan and Yuan, for such an interactive session. These pictures can be received very easily by the participants. And thank you, Sirish sir, for asking the questions that have been put up by the participants. So moving on to our next topic, its most relevant topic now, nitrosamine impurities. So given the depth of this topic, it requires a number of sessions. It's really long to know. But for now, we will restrict ourselves to current regulatory status of nitrosamine impurities. For this, we have Dr. B.M. Rao, Vice President, Head of Emerging Markets QA, and Head of Analytical Science and Technology and Corporate Quality Control from Dr. Reddy's, with over 25 years of experience in AR&D and QC. We welcome him to share his insights. Welcome, sir.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Sneha, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sneha. Good evening, everyone, and I would like to thank IPA for giving me this opportunity just to briefly talk about the nitrosamine impurities current regulatory status. Next slide, please. So as far as the current regulatory guidances are, when we look at the guidances, there are 5 major regulatory agencies published the guidances. So the European Medicines Agency, EMA, has now published their, just starting my video, sorry. Yeah. So there are 5 major regulatory agencies has published the guidelines, European Medicines Agency has now revision 4 published on June 29, 2021, and FDA published the first guidance in September 1st, 2020. Then the current guidance is available as of February 2021, and very recently even the ANVISA from Brazil has also published a guidance on nitrosamine impurities, which is effective from May 31st, 2021. That is version 1. And also Swissmedic has published a guideline in April 16, 2021. Then Health Canada has an updated version which is available. Update 2 is available from December 15, 2020. So most of the major regulators have already given the guidances. Next slide, please. I think for the benefit of the participants, I have just summarized, the various requirements of published by major regulatory agencies, for risk assessment. So most of you know that the risk assessment contains 3 major. Is the risk evaluation, and step 2 is the confirmatory testing, and step 3 is changes to the market authorization. So if you see, I think I'm sure most of the industry, even in our company, we have completed the step 1 process, that is risk evaluation. So basically what we have done is for most of our APIs and all of our APIs and drug products, we have completed the risk evaluation. So we identified whether the risk is there or not with respect to particular APIs or drug products. So now we have a list of APIs where the risk is identified, and we have a list of drug products where the list is identified. So this activity we have completed before the 31st March 2021. That is the deadline set by most of the regulatory agencies. Now coming back to confirmatory testing, right now we are working on the confirmatory testing. Basically, wherever we have identified the risk for nitrosamines based on the chemical synthesis or the anything from the which is coming from the excipients through drug products, drug product manufacturing. So based on that assessment, wherever we have identified the risks, now we are working on the step 2 of the process. We are working on the developing the sensitive methods and validating the methods, followed by the confirmatory testing. So this work is under progress. And similarly, once we complete the step 2, I think it is recommended for the regulatory agencies, I think, to need to make necessary changes to the marketing authorization. So the timelines for the step 2 and step 3 are almost similar. Please go to the next slide. And this is very, very important slide. In fact, when we do the risk assessment for the nitrosamines, I think I have captured this from the USP 1469 general chapter, where they have very nicely captured, what are the potential sources from where the nitrosamines impurities can crop up either in the API or in the drug product. And I think from each and every potential source, I think the assessment need to be done. For example, solvents, they have very clearly given, like, if we use poor quality of solvents, how the nitrosamine impurities can crop up into API or drug product. And especially during the API synthesis, if someone uses the recycled solvents, because many API manufacturers use recycled solvents. So what type of nitrosamine impurities can come? And especially when we have dimethyl formamide as a solvent, for example, when we use recycling, when we do, and we use the recycled solvent, we'll have a dimethylamine. There is a potential presence of dimethylamine. So that can potentially react with any nitrosamine agent in the synthesis, and it can potentially form a nitrosamine impurity. In the similar way, water, which can be a potential source, where we need to check the presence of residual dialkylamines. Impurities can degrade to form dialkylamines, or presence of acids and nitrosamine agents. In the similarly excipients, I think it is very, very important in the raw material or excipients to check for the presence of nitrites, other nitrosamine agents, or nitrosamine impurities if applicable. So for the API, in the similar way for the API, use of sodium azide, nitrates in acids, use of trialkylamines, amides in presence of nitrates and acid medium, use of recovered solvents contains nitrosamines or their precursors, which I already talked about it. Then use of sanitized water, which may contain, example, chloramines, and any insufficient purification can lead to the presence of potential nitrosamines. And sometimes even we identified that degradation of API over a period of time also can, potentially, produce nitrosamines. For example, if you all remember the ranitidine case, where a lot of market recall happens in the ranitidine, the NDMA impurity, it did not form during the API synthesis, but over a period of stability, this NDMA impurity was increased. So that's where the overall ranitidine has been stopped and a lot of batches have been recalled. Similarly, in the manufacturing process, like any contamination, nitrosamines can come from the contamination. Use of Ricardo solvents containing nitrosamines or their precursors. Nitrous oxide in the air, because we use a lot of air during the manufacturing process, and any other potential carryover of relevant reactive species. Then API stability I already mentioned. Even sometimes the APIs are potentially contains the functional groups which contain secondary, tertiary, and quaternary amine groups in the molecule, which itself can degrade and can react with any other nitrates or nitrosating agents and can give potential nitrosamines. And presence of nitrate counterions can also lead to the nitrosamine impurities. Last but not least, there is a quite amount of possibility for giving the nitrosamine impurities, especially from the container closures or packaging materials, which contains vulnerable amines. Next slide, please. So I have compiled the acceptable intake limits for specific nitrosamine impurities published from various guidelines. So I have captured here almost 9 nitrosamines where the acceptable intake limits have been published by the major regulators like EMA, FDA, Anvisa, Swissmedic, and Healthcare. So if you can see, for example, NDMA, where they have clearly published that CAS number and what is the nanogram per day acceptable intake limit. Like it is for all regulators, they have published for NDMA 96.0 nanogram per day. So basically, I am not going to read all the values. They have already stated in this slide. But one important thing I would like to mention here is when we are going to arrive at a specification limit in the product, it will be calculated based on the acceptable daily intake, that is nanogram per day, which is published by the major regulators, the value we have to take, and maximum daily dose, milligram per day. For example, if the limit is acceptable daily limit is 96 nanogram per day, then the maximum daily dose is, for example, 880 milligrams per day. So the calculation will come like 96.0 divided by 880 milligram. So that will be the specification limit in ppm for the drug product or for the drug substance. We calculate accordingly. Next slide, please. I think the guidances for the testing method requirements have been clearly stated in the majority of the regulatory guidances provided. So basically all guidances, requires the method which we develop for the nitrosamine impurities should be very sensitive method, and it should be appropriately validated. And of course, the testing type is quantitative, because we'll be, reporting the results in a quantitative way. And there are slight differences in the guidelines with respect to the expectation of the limit of quantification for the methods. So for example, first I'll talk about the FDA guideline. What FDA guideline is saying is, when we establish the method, when we set the method, the limit of detection and limit of quantification are reasonably practical for the products with the maximum daily dose higher than 1 gram. So that is the expectation. And if greater than 1 nitrosamine is listed, the LOQ should be less than 0.03 ppm. So this is the expectation given in the FDA guideline. If the maximum daily dose is greater than 1 gram, for example, if it is 1200 milligram, the LOQ should be below 0.02 ppm. So this is the very clear expectation given. If there are multiple nitrosamines, again the total nitrosamine limit should not cross 0.03 ppm. So that this is the expectation from the FDA. But where the European guideline, EMA mentions that LOQ should be less than or equal to the acceptable limit based on the relevant acceptable intake for the respective nitrosamine impurity. I'll just talk very briefly in my next slide about these in little more detail. And NVSA is a little bit tougher than other regulators. They have clearly mentioned that the LOD or LOQ should be less than 10% of the limit of AA. For example, if my acceptable intake for the nitrosamine impurity is 1%, 1 ppm, sorry, then my LOQ of the method is 0.1 ppm. So that is 10 times lower. So much more stringent limit given by the NVSA. In the similar way, Swiss also following the similar guidelines what FDA is suggesting, the LOQ should be less than 0.03 ppm or 30 ppb. And in the similar way, the Health Canada also mostly, following the European guideline, where the LOQ should be less than or equal to acceptable limit for the most potent nitrosamine detected in an API or drug product. Next slide, please. I think this is very, very important slide, especially when we do the, confirmatory testing. I think there are very clear recommendations given by the major regulators. So I think the European regulatory has very, very specifically given some specific requirements. So they have given 3 parts. One is, when we can omit the testing, when we can do the skip testing, and when we have to do the testing in very regular for all the batches. So for example, the LOQ of the analytical method should be employed, should be less than 10% of the acceptable intake limit. So suppose if there is an NDMA where the limit for the drug product is 1 ppm, and if my LOQ is less than, if I could able to develop a method with a sensitive limit of quantification less than 10%, that is 0.1 ppm, then, and if whatever the batches I tested, if all the batches, if the particular nitrosamine impurity is less than 0.1 ppm, I can go for omission. If by any reason I could not achieve the less than 10% of the LOQ with respect to the acceptable limit, specification limit, if I could able to get 30%, for example, if my LOQ is 0.3 ppm, then I need to test at least, there are some recommendations given how many batches we have to test, like annually 10% of the batches should be tested. So as a part of skip testing. And by any challenges, if you could not, if my LOQ is less than or equivalent to acceptable limit based on the relevant acceptable intake limit for the respective nitrosamine impurity, I think the recommendation from the European agencies to test all the batches, 100% of the batches. So in the similar way, as I mentioned for the FDA, they have suggested some alternative approaches when we decide on the omission or skip testing, supported by sufficient process understanding and evidence on the adequate statistical control, and need to submit the data to FDA prior to implementation. But for the routine control, if the nitrosamine impurity is detected above the LOQ, FDA is suggesting to go with the routine control. In fact, we have certain cases, certain APIs where we are regularly, all the batches we are testing, for the specified nitrosamine impurities before releasing into the market. In the similar way, NVISA also mentioned, as I mentioned, they are much, much tougher to compare to other regulators. They mentioned less than 10% of the AA limit we can omit. And if the results are above 10% of the AA limit, control must be included. So other approaches can be justified not exceeding the limit of 30%. So in the similar way, just you can go through the Swiss Medica and Health Canada requirements. Next slide, please. So I think this slide basically talks about when we have already the marketed products, what are the regulatory agencies are saying is, so for example, European regulators are saying when we have the marketed products, 10% of the annual batches are three batches per year, whichever is highest is mandatory to test. And if fewer than 3 batches manufactured annually, then all batches should be tested. If multiple manufacturer, multiple processes and sources at high risk raw materials are were used historically for the batches still within the expiry, then testing additional batches would be necessary to cover the risk factors. So there are clear recommendations. But as I mentioned, if we have the, if you remember my earlier slide, if we have the LOQ 10% below of the specification limit, then if all the batches, tested, including some stability samples, because it is very, very important to test the stability samples at the mid of the stability, end of the shelf stability, and after the shelf life also, just to make sure that no nitrosamine impurity is, coming also in the stability samples. So in all the samples, both in the fresh batches as well as in the stability batches, if the nitrosamine impurity is less than the limit, the 10% level of the LOQ, then there is no, then we can write the justification and we can omit the testing. But in case if it is more, then the skip testing, these are the recommendations. And FDA talks very, broadly about, to do the proper risk assessment and evaluation, take the decision on the, testing of the batches. And NVISA is very similar to the European agency. In the similar way they have written the guidances, and Swissmedic also following the FDA, and Health Canada is mostly recommending in the similar way what European agency are recommending. Next slide, please. So this is for the new registration and post-approval products. So again, for the new registration or for the post-approval products, there are some specific requirements given by various regulatory agencies, like European EMA mentioned that for new and ongoing marketing authorization applications, the number of batches to be tested as a part of any confirmatory testing should be commensurate with the risk in line with ICH M7 R1 guideline. And they have also recommended, because since they are the new registrations for the new filings, the source of risk has to be well understood by doing some spike or purge studies, such as impurity levels are expected to be consistent from batch to batch. I think we need to, it is recommended to do some purge studies, and then the test results from minimum 6 pilot scale batches or 3 production scale batches may be sufficient. And like that, there are specific recommendations given. Of course, FDA talks again very broadly on the, to do a thorough risk assessment, and based on the risk assessment evaluation, proper, confirmatory testing or testing requirement need to be defined. So in the similar way, NVISA has given the number of batches to be tested must be consistent with the quantity required by the current legislation. However, for the petition required that less than 3 batches, the implementation will be considered on the implementation of the batches also later in order to complete 3 required batches. So even the Swissmedic is also basically following the EMA requirements, and Health Canada also given some specific, very specific recommendations for the new registration and new product approvals. I think this is my last slide, Sneha. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I invite Sirish sir for the Q&A session.
Hi, Dr. Rao. How are you? Good to hear your presentation. It was a very nice presentation, giving the details. You are able to hear me?
Yes, yes, sir.
Good. I think there are some questions related to the nitrosamine impurities. First question is related to, in your experience, how many products will require the testing percentage-wise? If it is 100% your products are coming, what percentage will be required to go for the testing fully?
Sir, actually, it is based on the risk assessment, because as I mentioned, the step 1 is, to do the risk evaluation. So from the risk evaluation, we'll identify, but according to me, suppose, for example, in our case, which are going for the confirmatory testing is about 30%, roughly. because we do the risk assessment. Like for example, we have done for 200 products, approximately 60 products are identified with the risk. So once the risk is identified, then we'll start developing the method, sensitive method with respect to the identified risk nitrosamines. Then we develop the method, validate the method. Then we will see if we, in the conformity testing, if whatever the different acceptance criteria I mentioned with respect to various regulatory agencies, if we are well below that limits, we'll go for the omission. If we are above that limits, then we'll go for the routine control. That is the approach we are following.
Routine testing is going to put a lot of stress onto the quality instruments and the people and release time, and everything is going to be under stress probably.
Yes.
With routine testing, if it comes to routine testing.
Yes, absolutely.
Very specific instruments to do this analysis, not easy. Secondly, you talked about all the countries except India. Is anything being done in India on these lines, on nitrosamine?
Right now, there are, to my knowledge, there is no guidance has been published in India on the nitrosamines. But however, like, I think for example, the products like we have the experience with valsartan, some experiences with ranitidine and all. So even for the metformin, I think some companies had issues and recalled. So I think because we use a lot of metformin in India also, so proactively, for example, we have tested the metformin for the nitrosamine impurities. Because a lot of diabetic patients regularly use metformin. So
yeah, maybe within short time, Indian FDA will also come with the guidelines on this.
Yes. They will come with specific guidances. Yes.
There is one question from Sunil Patel of Intas Pharma. How can we initially consider the root cause of the presence of nitrosamine impurities? Did you get the question?
Yeah. So I understood the question. So basically, as I mentioned, the initial root cause will come to know only from the risk evaluation. So for example, API, the API, the expert scientist, R&D scientist will do the thorough risk assessment. So for example, whether the nitrosamine is possible to come from the, synthetic route, right? Or it is possible to come from the key starting materials or any recycled solvents they are using in the synthesis. So those assessment will be thoroughly done by the R&D scientists for the API. In the similar way, drug product manufacturer also do assessment coming API risk as well as with respect to the excipients and other materials used in the drug product manufacturing, including the equipment, water, all those things. So basically, it comes from the risk assessment, the root cause.
There is one more question from the Pankaj Patil of Ajanta Pharma. Can declaration from API manufacturer consider for the evaluation rather than to actual testing?
Yes, considered. Only thing is the when API manufacturers will give any risk assessment. Suppose I am buying the API from the manufacturer. I think it is my responsibility to make sure that whatever the evaluation they have given, it is scientifically sound and justifiable. Because tomorrow, if I get any impurity in the drug product, as a drug product manufacturer, I am the answerable. So I can accept the report, but the report should be, because we are also buying a lot of APIs from different companies. So when we get the API assessment report, we'll evaluate thoroughly whether really it is scientific, everything is proper, whether they have done the testing of the batches, confirmatory testing, everything, then only we'll take a call.
So don't just accept it, thoroughly review it and accept it. Yeah, that's
review it and make, if it is making scientifically sound, justifiable, then only we'll accept.
So no more question, Dr. Rao. Thank you very much for a very informative session again. We are going to have another session on testing now. Next question on the nitrosamine testing. So that will actually complement your whatever you talked about. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sirish, sir. Thank you, Dr. Rao, for such a comprehensive session on nitrosamine impurities, the regulatory expectations, its acceptable limits for daily exposure, and acceptable quality limits in various stages of product life cycle. As Sirish, sir, said, we have learned about what is the current regulatory status of nitrosamines. Now we move on to the next is the evaluation of nitrosamine impurities. So this is the last session for the day, and we have Dr. Mrinal Jayawant, who is having close to 20 years of experience in the industry and currently serving as the Senior Director of the Research and Development Wing, USP India. Welcome, ma'am.
Hello, can you hear me? Just a quick sound check. Okay, thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Mrinal Jayawant, Senior Director R&D at USP India. Firstly, I would like to thank IPA for giving USP the opportunity to be part of this prestigious workshop. I would also like to thank Dr. Rao for his excellent presentation and setting the tone for nitrosamines. Topic of my today's talk is testing methods for N-nitrosamines monitoring in pharmaceuticals. Next slide. In my today's presentation, I will start with a brief overview of USP's nitrosamine activities. Followed by that, I will discuss method performance characteristics and factors that impact sensitivity and selectivity of analytical procedures. And in the end, I will discuss 4 analytical procedures which are part of our General Chapter 1469 and the analytical challenges. Next slide. So to protect patients and strengthen the global medicine supply chain, USP is working on several initiatives to address emergence of nitrosamine impurities and related recalls. So a joint subcommittee was convened by USP in February 2020, and a charge was given to this joint subcommittee to develop a strategy, nitrosamine strategy for USP. Joint subcommittee comprising members from different expert committees, the FDA representative and the USP staff decided to develop a general chapter above 1000, which is a guidance chapter 1469 on nitrosamine impurities to address the nitrosamine impurities safety concern from a pharmacopoeia perspective. And to support this general chapter, USP has also released 8 nitrosamine reference standards, which are listed here, and USP is also considering to develop additional nitrosamine impurities to support our industry stakeholders under the new initiative called Pharmaceutical Analytical Impurities. Next slide, please. So the general chapter was published on September 1st, 2020 in Pharmaceutical Forum PF 465. The commentary period ended on 30th November 2020. So the comments were reviewed and addressed by joint subcommittee, and then the chapter was taken forward for balloting. This chapter was further approved by chemical analysis expert committee, general chapter expert committee, and the chapter was published in the USP NF 2021 issue 3. On 1st June 2021. The chapter will be official from 1st December 2021. We go to full screen mode. Okay, next slide. Okay, so apart from this general chapter 1469, USP is also supporting stakeholders with additional tools and resources for testing and assessing the risk of nitrosamine impurities. So USP has held scientific webinars, workshop, roundtable conferences, discussions and conferences on nitrosamine impurities to raise awareness about regulatory requirements as well as about the general chapter 1469. USP has also uploaded nitrosamine tutorial videos to YouTube to help our analytical scientists in the troubleshooting of analytical procedures, and published review article on testing methods. Just go to next. Next, please. Yeah. USP is recently launched education course on nitrosamine general chapter 1469 on 15th and 16th of June 2021. Next, please. And the laboratory scientists are currently evaluating methods not just for drug substances and drug products, but also for determination of nitrosamines in commercial grade solvents, water, as well as in excipients. Next, please. So recently, USP has launched Nitrosamine Exchange, a knowledge community. So here the experts from across the world, they exchange their ideas, knowledge, experience with each other. And initially the scope of this exchange community was to develop standard or guidance document for nitrosamine risk assessment, and now the scope has been expanded to accommodate analytical procedures as well. Next, please. So I encourage everyone to join this nitrosamine exchange community. Details are over here on this slide. Next, please. Now let us look at our general chapter 1469, where we have 9 sections. It starts from introduction, and then it covers brief background of nitrosamine impurities, what are the different sources of nitrosamines, how to do risk assessment and develop control strategy, how to calculate and arrive at limits of nitrosamine, what are testing requirement for the presence of nitrosamine if there are more than 2 nitrosamines present, test method performance characteristics, and analytical procedure, and in the end additional sources of information. Next slide. So how do we really decide that what should be the required sensitivity for the analytical procedures? There are many analytical procedures which are published by regulators, by different academic institutions and industry. So if you are using any of these methods, you will have to still evaluate in your laboratory. And if you are developing your in-house method, then also you should know what should be the required sensitivity for your analytical method. In order to comply with regulatory requirements, it is your product should contain nitrosamine below the or equal to acceptable intake. So always this nitrosamine level should be less than the acceptable intake. That means you should have a method sensitive enough to detect any level below the acceptable intake limit. And hence your method should be sensitive enough to quantify the nitrosamines with acceptable accuracy and precision. And hence LOQ is always preferred over LOD when you are quantifying nitrosamines. In case you're using limit test, you can establish LOD of your method. So in short, the requirement is your method should have LOQ, which is less than or equal to acceptable intake limit, and it should also meet respective regulatory recommendations. Next slide. So this is about recommendations by FDA in its FDA's guidance, which was revised guidance, which was published in February 2021. So in the guidance, it is clearly mentioned if there are multiple nitrosamines present and maximum daily dose is less than 880 mg, the LOQ recommended LOQ values should be less than or equal to 0.03 ppm. And for where you have products with maximum daily dose greater than 880 mg, your LOQ should be as low as reasonably practical. So again, in short, your LOQ should be less than the test result what you obtain, and your result should be less than or equal to acceptable intake. This is just to decide what should be the sensitivity for my analytical method. Next, please. In EMA assessment report, also it is recommended that your LOQ should be less than or equal to acceptable limit. And just now, Dr. Rao explained in very detail about when do we do routine control, when do we justify skip testing, and when can we justify omission from the specification. So in case you want to control it routinely, your value should be less than LOQ, and LOQ should be less than or equal to acceptable limit. In case you want to justify skip testing, then your value should be again less than LOQ, and LOQ should be less than or equal to 30% of your acceptance limit. And to justify omission, it should be less than or equal to 10% of acceptable limit. Of course, there are exceptions which may be needed depending on the maximum daily dose, and if there are more than 1 nitrosamines expected to be present in your product. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of several published methods for nitrosamines available in public domain. Many regulators, including FDA, Health Canada, EMA, HSA, have published their methods on their website. USP has also published methods in its general chapter, and this is to assist our industry stakeholders in testing of samples for nitrosamine content. Next slide. Now, when we are evaluating any of these published methods in our laboratory, or we are developing our own in-house method, we should identify certain performance characteristics which are important, which are suitable for the method and to ensure that it is fit for purpose. So these are some of the important performance characteristics are sensitivity, selectivity, accuracy and precision, linearity and robustness. So here sensitivity is if your method should be sensitive enough to detect levels below acceptable intake limits. In case of selectivity, method should be selective for the target nitrosamines. And in case of accuracy and precision, this is very complicated because this depends on the matrix, sample matrix, and all analytical scientists face several challenges to get the expected accuracy and precision results. So this is because there are challenges with respect to extraction efficiency, and sometimes we end up getting lower values of recovery because of the matrix effect. Then the linearity, everyone should consider a LOQ value in the linearity, and LOQ should be as low as reasonably practical. It would, if possible, you try to achieve a LOQ less than 10% of your AI. And you can include, up to 150% of your AI. Even you can go on the higher side if you are using same method for your crude samples where you are expecting higher results, as long as your response is linear. And robustness is one of the, again, very important performance characteristics, as it ensures the consistency and reproducibility of results. So in short, your method which we are developing or evaluating in our laboratory should be sensitive, selective, accurate, precise, linear in the range, as well as robust. Next slide. Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
I cannot see my slides. Can you see?
No, we cannot.
We are unable to see the slides.
Yes.
Neha, it is showing a signal out of range.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm also getting same message. Please adjust your resolution to support.
Kenneth, can you do something? Something is technical issue, yeah.
Yeah.
Kenneth has, I think he's trying to connect. So let us wait for a moment.
Sneha, you can announce probably. There is some technical issue we are resolving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I can see my slides now. I'm not going into detail of analytical procedure development. It is always recommended to follow AQBD approach when you are developing a method. So you need to identify, first define your ATP, understand what is the ultimate aim, what you want to achieve. And then based on the chemical properties, can you just go to next, please? Just click one more time. Yeah. So based on the chemical properties, you normally decide which technique you are going to use, and accordingly you can define your critical quality attributes and critical method parameters. And this is normally used during the risk assessment. Next, please. And once this is done, then you start with your analytical procedure development, where you actually perform degradation studies, you do develop method, check for selectivity, and then you do robustness study. Once this is done, then you go for validation. So this is what is recommended when you are developing any analytical procedure, and especially when we are dealing with such low levels for nitrosamine. I think we should gain good knowledge, scientific understanding of the method and knowledge about the method. Go to next. And these are some, this is the overview of mass spectrometry, several procedures which are being published, used, available in the public domain. They use, LC, GC, ICP as sample introduction of front end to mass. Most commonly used are LC and GC. You can also use the ionization sources could be depending on what front end you use. It can be EI, CI, API, ESI, APCI, or MALDI. And in case of analyzer, it could be either single quadrupole or triple quadrupole, time of flight, Q-TOF, Q-orbit trap, anything. Next, please. Yeah, and then you can also decide data acquisition strategies. Next, please. You need to also understand what exactly you want to achieve. Is it, is it that the method should be more selective or sensitive? So in case you have compounds which are closely having MBZ values very close, you cannot use mass analyzer having low resolving power. So in that case, you need to use higher resolving power mass analyzers to get greater selectivity. Next, please. And this is one reference which is already available in the public domain, which is on metformin hydrochloride, where you can see when the public testing laboratory used low resolution mass analyzer, they could not distinguish between DMF and NDMA, and they co-eluted, and therefore overestimation was reported. And when the high resolution mass analyzer was used by FDA for the same samples, results obtained were on the lower side. Can you just click? Yeah, so here you can see the difference between the two NDMA content, where you have just one NDMA and another on the right hand side NDMA plus interference. Next, please. This is regarding section 7 of General Chapter 1469, where you have test method performance characteristics for nitrosamine method. So this section elaborates on what are the test method performance characteristics to be used when you are using quantitative analysis and when you have limit tests. So there is a difference, and accordingly you can choose your test method performance characteristics. To validate the method, you can refer to USP General Chapter 1225, and in order to verify the method, you can use 1226. Next, please. 7.1 also covers consideration for sample preparation, and here is one example where we can see that NDMA can be generated at higher temperature because of degradation of API if there is a source of nitrosating agent available, and it can also be formed in C2 in case dimethylamine is present as process impurity or as a counter ion of salt form of the API. So in presence of nitrite and acid, it can lead to in situ formation of nitrosamine. And hence, for ranitidine drug substance drug products, it is highly recommended to use LCMS over GCMS to avoid degradation of API. Yeah, next please. Now, the section 8 talks about different analytical procedures, and you can see here there are 4 analytical procedures. Procedure 1 and procedure 3 use liquid chromatography as front end, and ESI is used as ionization source for procedure 1 with Q-Orbitrap as mass analyzer. For procedure 3, it is APCI is used as ionization source and triple quadrupole is used as mass analyzer. For procedure 2 and 4, GC is used as front end for sample introduction, and EI is used as ionization source, and triple quadrupole is used as mass analyzer. Next, please. Yeah, so I'm again not going into details of the method because this is available in our general chapter. The point which I would like to highlight over here is here we have used different acquisition mode. So it can be SIM or PRM. So depending on your requirement, you can choose any of the acquisition modes. Next, please. Now click on one more time. Yeah. So here you can see difference between SIM and PRM. I'm not again going into detail, but you know that Q-Orbitrap has better, like it is having high resolution, mass resolution. It provides better accuracy in terms of mass measurement. And if you use selected ion monitoring, then obviously there is a good sensitivity can be increased. If you want to further enhance its selectivity as well as sensitivity, you can use PRM mode, which is parallel reaction monitoring acquisition mode. Just click one more time. So this is the difference between SIM and PRM, and where you can see sensitivity and selectivity can be enhanced if you use PRM acquisition mode. Go to the next slide, please. This is procedure 3. This procedure is also available in the general chapter, and here you can see we are using triple quadrupole, and we have used MRM as acquisition mode. Next, please. Yeah, so triple quadrupole is, we know that as compared to HRMS, it is having low resolving power. However, it gives always a better signal to noise ratio and more sensitive. You can either use selected reaction monitoring or multiple reaction monitoring. Again, if you want to enhance the selectivity, you can go for MRM, which is multiple reaction monitoring. Next slide. Next, please. Yeah, now we will just discuss about sample preparation. Like there are samples which are insoluble in diluent. So in this procedure, we have used solvent with diluent in which sartans are insoluble. However, we have to ensure that there is 100% extraction, and this can be done if you ensure that sartans are fully dispersed in the diluent. So there are no clumps or any dry spots. So this is how, even if it is insoluble, you have to ensure that it is completely dispersed to ensure extraction efficiency. Next slide. So these are multiple scenarios. Your drug substance is soluble in extraction solvent, so you don't have to really worry because you will not face any extraction efficiency issues. Okay, but in case it is somewhat soluble in your the diluent which you are using, then you have to optimize extraction time and as well as mixing to ensure proper extraction. In case your drug substance is completely insoluble, then you must exercise a caution, and because there is high probability that nitrosamines will get absorbed onto the API. So yes, there are multiple extraction efficiency issues which are faced by all analytical scientists. So one of the strategies is, can you go to the next slide, is to use matrix precipitation strategy, where you're using dissolving your drug substance in an appropriate solvent where it is completely soluble, and then you add an anti-solvent to precipitate the drug substance. So here there are multiple advantages, like full dissolution of the drug substance guarantees that nitrosamines are transferred into solution. Because of precipitation of drug substance, you are actually preventing potential contamination or damage to your mass spectrometer. This is also less time consuming than the actual extraction, and it is more reproducible. Next slide, please. You can also use internal standard. It is always recommended, because once you use internal standard and you for calculation, when you determine analyte to internal standard response ratio, then it compensates for not just for the matrix effect, but also the ion separation effect. So if you are using internal standard during sample preparation itself, it accounts for both the issues, which is extraction issues as well as ionization efficiency issues. And in case you are using this internal standard just prior to sample injection, then it only accounts for the ionization efficiency issues. When you are choosing your internal standard, you should ensure that it is similar to your analyte. So the preferred one is isotopically labeled compounds. Go to next slide. When you are choosing isotopically labeled compounds, then this is always a preferred one, because they behave exactly the same way as your analyte in terms of sample preparation, chromatographic separation, as well as mass ionization. But there are several challenges associated with this, because it is not very easy to synthesize these or obtain these in isotopically labeled compounds, and they are highly expensive. There is also uncertainty about the purity and integrity of those internal isotopically labeled internal standard. So in USP General Chapter 3 of the procedures, you can see that we have recommended use of internal standards. Next slide, please. So this is procedure 2. Again, I'm not going into detail, and here also we are using triple quadruple. So we have used multiple reaction monitoring mode, and you can see there are 2 transitions for some of the nitrosamines we are recommending, and this is to just reduce the interference and enhance the selectivity. Go to the next slide. This is procedure 4, which is similar to procedure 2, which we discussed just now. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. Just go on clicking until you finish. So you can just go on clicking. There is few more. Yeah, click one more time. One more time. One more time. Yeah. Thanks. So this is a summary of factors which have impact on sensitivity and selectivity both. So in case you are using low resolution mass, then you know how to enhance selectivity. We have already discussed this. In case you are using high resolution mass, how to increase sensitivity. If you are using triple quadruple, what do we do? Which acquisition mode we use, and even for high resolution mass. So this slide is summary of everything what we have discussed so far, including the sensitivity and accuracy issues, as well as sample preparation issues. That's it. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I invite Sirish sir to take up the audience questions.
Thank you, Nunal. It was a very complex subject. You have made it so simple. So it's very nice presentation. Thank you. I think there are not many questions. There are 2 questions. Let me ask first question. It is from the Hariom Prakash Vishwakarma of Intas Pharma. He's asking, are biological products containing excipients comes under evaluation of nitrosamine impurities or not?
So it depends on the regulatory.
Biological products containing excipients, will it come under the evaluation of nitrosamine impurities or no?
Yeah, so USFDA is not really explicit about the biological products, but EMA has specifically mentioned for biological products, they have to do risk assessment. So yes, we should.
It will be covered. Okay.
Yes.
Second question is from Ram Babu Komti of Sun Pharma. He's asking, there are multiple nitrosamine impurities in the literature, as well as you are seeing that lot of. is there any plan to develop a common method so that we can check all nitrosamines in one analysis?
Yes, we are working on that. We are currently exploring that and developing a method which can be used as called as a universal method for all nitrosamines. So yes, it is very much in our to-do list and work is in progress.
Thank you, Mrinal. I think that's all for today. Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much. Thank you.
We're closing exactly on time. That's great. 2030.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for enriching us with the analytical techniques to be used to evaluate nitrosamine impurities based on their exposure limits, types of methods to be used, and sensitivity. So with this, we come to the end of day one of the 6th Advanced GMP Workshop 2021. On behalf of the IPA, I would like to thank the speakers for their insightful sessions and the participants for taking out time to attend this forum. We hope you found these sessions thought-provoking. Over the years, audience feedback has been instrumental in making the sessions more fruitful and practically applicable. As emphasized in the beginning, I remind you all to kindly spend few minutes to provide your feedback for the day one and the feedback link in the microsite. We'll also be sending each participant an email with the link to provide their feedback for the session. Thank you all once again for joining us. We hope to see you all tomorrow evening at 4 p.m. on the same link. Have a great evening. Thank you.